Over 100 Ukrainian women have been exchanged in the latest prisoner swap with Russia, with 110 detainees returning to Moscow.
Schools and transport are facing disruption across France as trade unions hold a nationwide strike over pay.
Safety concerns for the Iranian rock climber Elnaz Rakabi, who competed in a competition in Seoul without a hijab. Now there are reports she had to fly home early.
6 men stand trial in Vienna over their alleged ties to a suspected jihadist who carried out a deadly shooting in the Austrian capital in 2020.
Over 100 Ukrainian women have been exchanged in the latest prisoner swap with Russia. The oldest woman was 62, the youngest 21. Officials also said that 37 of the women had previously been evacuated from the once besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. At the same time, 110 prisoners were returned to Russia from Ukraine. For the first time, Russia's Commissioner for Human Rights met up with her Ukrainian counterpart. Ukraine's President Zelensky used his nightly address to mention that some of the Ukrainians had been captured long before the full scale of war, but they'd not been forgotten. "We do not forget about any of our people," he said. "We have to return them all, and we will return them." There were more drone attacks on the capital Kyiv overnight. Ukraine's emergency service shared video showing rescuers clearing debris and trying to evacuate residents from the buildings from Monday's attacks.
The Russians want to bring the depression to Ukrainians. Instead, everybody very angry and want to defend our hometown, the home country.
Russia says it's using its drones against legitimate targets such as electricity substations. Ukraine says civilians are the victims.
Russian airstrikes on several cities across Ukraine have pounded energy and infrastructure facilities, cutting power and water, and terrorizing the population. The governor of the partly occupied area of Zaporizhia reported a fire in an infrastructure facility allegedly caused by kamikaze drones. And according to Ukraine's presidential office, an S-300 anti-aircraft missile was fired at a residential building in the southern city of Mykolaiv overnight, killing 1 person.
Grieving locals laid flowers and candles in Russia's port city of Yeysk to remember the victims of Monday's air crash, which killed at least 14 people, including 3 children. Russia's defense ministry said the Su-34 bomber plummeted into a residential area after one of its engines caught fire during a training mission. The jet collided with an apartment block which was home to around 600 people. The force of the impact caused the warplane to split into 2. Emergency services worked throughout the night to tackle the blaze, which engulfed at least 5 floors of the building and left burnt-out vehicles littered across the car park. On Tuesday, authorities said rescuers had ended their search for survivors in the rubble. Moscow says it's opened a criminal inquiry into possible violations of flight rules and has recovered flight recorders at the scene of the crash. Schools and transport are facing disruption across France today as trade unions hold a nationwide strike. It's part of a standoff with the government over walkouts at oil depots that have sparked fuel shortages. Strikers are calling for wage increases in the face of soaring inflation. They're also protesting a government order that's forced employees at refineries and fuel depots back to work, something unions say is an affront to the right to industrial action.
The question of salaries is widely shared throughout the country. Today is day of interprofessional strikes. We're even seeing strikes at Disney, for example. Despite the increase in the minimum wage, the end of the month remains difficult, so we need another increase.
The strikes have put a heavy strain on France's oil industry since late September. But staff at Total Energy's refineries and depots are continuing industrial action. Recent walkouts have left petrol stations in France struggling for fuel, with motorists forced to wait in long queues at the pump.
France was supposed to be plunged into chaos this Tuesday as unions had called for a nationwide general strike, but that chaos has yet to materialize. There are significant disruptions in the transport sector and in the energy sector, but in other parts of the economy, workers have not joined the walkout, at least not massively. Schools are operating, hospitals are open. Later today, here in the French capital, workers are expected to gather. They are once again going to demand better wages. Many of them say they are struggling to make ends meet and that certain companies have not shared the profit that they have been making over the last few years. That demand for better wages is something that members of the administration of Emmanuel Macron say they agree with. The Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, gave an interview earlier today saying that in certain areas of the economy, employers should indeed rethink how they're paying their employees. But the official position of the government is that a particular group of workers should go back to the job. Oil refinery workers and fuel depot workers that have been striking for 3 weeks now, causing a lot of disruption in fuel distribution. As I speak here in the French capital, it's still very difficult to fill your tank. It can take up to 3 hours, and that is if you find a petrol station that is operating. Those strikers had been hoping that they would get even more support today, but that has not materialized, at least not for now. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, has said that it's not up to him to tell private companies how to pay their employees, but it is up to him to run this country. And that is why he said the government was ordering those strikers back to the job. That has not happened, at least not yet, but it's going to be interesting and very important to see how much support this strike movement, this walkout receives today. It's going to determine just how much pressure these unions can still put on the administration of Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who has been re-elected on a very ambitious platform, a platform of ambitious reforms, including an overhaul of the pension system, something that many of these unions and these strikers don't want to see happen. Annelise Borges in Paris for Euronews.
Inspiring a new generation of women and girls. Iranian athlete Elnaz Rakabi competes in a South Korean climbing competition not wearing a hijab. Now there are concerns for her safety. The BBC has quoted well-informed sources saying her passport and mobile phone had been confiscated before she boarded a plane back to Tehran. In an interview with Euronews in 2016, Rakabi spoke about wearing the headscarf mandatory in her country.
At the beginning, it was a little bizarre for the other athletes who were curious about a girl wearing a scarf on her head and an outfit that covered the arms and legs while competing in such hot temperatures. For sure, when it's hot, the hijab becomes a problem. But we've tried to create an outfit ourselves that respects the hijab and is compatible with practicing the sport of climbing.
Rakabi's move comes off the back of protests sweeping the country for 1 month now. The post on the athlete's Instagram account appears to apologise for the worries caused.
Great expectation in Vienna at the start of one of the most eagerly awaited trials of the last 2 years. 6 men sit in the dock for their alleged links to an Islamic State group sympathiser who carried out a shooting in the streets of the Austrian capital. 4 people were killed and more than 20 others were wounded. The attacker was shot dead. Lawyers for all 6 defendants had the same message.
My client is a close friend of the attacker. He will plead not guilty. He never contributed to the attack, neither physically nor mentally. And just because he belongs to a certain faith, you can't assume any guilt.
The 6 men on trial allegedly aided or influenced Fujim Fizulai as he prepared for the shooting. They face charges including participation in terrorist crimes. A ruling is not expected until next February. Until then, dozens of testimonies will help clarify what happened that fateful night on November 2nd, 2020, when an armed Islamic extremist roamed the streets shooting with a rifle at those who crossed his path, and what role his 6 alleged accomplices played.